Good morning. I'm your host, Nigelis Colmanus. And this is Jerusalem Today. Welcome to a special edition coming to you live from Jerusalem after the tumultuous events of last week. Well, unless you've been at sea or under a rock or in the desert for the last 3 years, you would have heard of Jesus of Nazareth. He's been traveling around the countryside performing miracles, healing people, getting huge crowds, and making a point of really upsetting the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and all the religious leaders. Well, he really took it up a notch last week in Jerusalem. And the whole city has been talking about nothing else but Jesus for the whole week. And that's why I'm here today, to get a feel of what's going on. It started last Sunday when he rode into town seated on a donkey, and huge crowds went out to meet him. And they were chanting, "Hosanna." It really did feel like they wanted to make him king there and then. And he didn't discourage their praise. The Romans would have been angry, and the Jewish leaders would have been furious. It was like he was deliberately winding them up. And what's also striking is that he seemed to be in control of the whole thing, like he planned the whole week, beginning with that entry. He seemed to be embracing the role of king. Well, then this Jesus really took things into overdrive on Monday when he went to the temple and deliberately overturned all the money changers' tables and drove out the animals and the doves from the temple courts. It seemed like he was deliberately wanting to put his life in danger. And even though it was a huge upset, I was actually thinking that was long overdue when the temple had become just a noisy marketplace and it was supposed to be a place of prayer. And amazingly, no one stopped him. It was like he had this incredible charisma that just let people do what he wanted. And he talked like he owned the place, and he said, "My house," as if the temple belonged to him. Well, the next Tuesday, he went into full anti-Pharisee attack mode. Look at this confrontation that he had with the Pharisees.
God, and you don't honor purity laws even on the most sacred day of the week? You Pharisees, you cleanse the outside of a cup and the dish, and then you eat and drink food that goes into a body that inside is full of greed and wickedness, last speck, while neglecting what is actually important of the law: justice and mercy and faithfulness. You blind guides, straining out an act while swallowing a camel. Look at these people.
The crowd loved it as he confronted the leaders with their fake religion and their obsession with ritual, not caring about the poor or showing mercy. The passion that he showed was visible to everyone. This was not the words of a crazy man. It seemed like he was stripping away hundreds of years of dross that had come over our religion that Moses gave us. And the message was so radical. It wasn't about politics or fighting. It was about your heart and your relationship to God. Well, finally, the inevitable happened. They arrested him. They tried him and convicted him, and in a very cunning move by the Jews, they got the Romans to crucify him by blackmailing Pilate with the threat of a riot. I must admit, I was ashamed to call myself a Jew when I saw what they did to Jesus that day.
Who claims to be your king?
We have no king but Caesar.
You must decide.
There was something about the way he died, horrific as it was. There was a majesty about him. He didn't argue, he didn't plead or protest. It's like he knew this needed to happen, and he was doing something for others that had to be done. There were so many strange things about the way he died last Friday. When he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That was the first time anyone had seen him truly despairing. He'd always seemed to be so in control. Then there was the eclipse and the earthquake and the huge temple of the curtain torn from top to bottom. It really did send shivers down the spine. Now, the Pharisees knew that Jesus' followers might try and pretend that he'd come to life again because he'd predicted he would come to life on multiple occasions. So the Pharisees and the Romans put a special guard on his tomb and made sure no one would steal his body in some sort of macabre trick. But in spite of all that security, today we hear the incredible news reports of sightings of Jesus coming back alive. That's why I'm here, to get to the bottom of this story. So first off, I found one of the Roman guards who was on the tomb duty this weekend and who may have something to say about it. Here's a video interview I recorded earlier today with one of the guards, Titus.
It's simple. The tomb was sealed, the stone was heavy. Those disciples of his, they must have snuck in, stole the body, probably at night while I was patrolling. All I know is the body was there when we started the night, and in the morning, lo and behold, the stone is moved and the tomb was empty. Well, it must have been those wretched fishermen and tax collectors and thieves who followed Jesus. Who else would have taken that body? Those followers were desperate to keep their story alive. Anyway, I've got to go. I'm in a bit of a rush now. I've got to meet a man about a new villa that I'm eyeing. Now that I've come into some coin, I'm retiring from the military. Anyway, there was an earthquake last night to be sure. And maybe they just got lucky and the earthquake moved the stone. People see what they want to see. Anyway, the body's gone and I say the disciples took it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go and look at some villas.
Something doesn't add up. How did that soldier get all that money, and why wasn't he punished by his bosses for letting the body be stolen? I know that Roman soldiers are punished very strictly, even with death, if they fail on a duty. So I'm really surprised that he wasn't punished, and that he was even allowed to speak to the media. How come he suddenly got all that money? Something doesn't add up there. Let's hear from another witness, Mary Magdalene, follower of Jesus, who claims she saw him alive this morning. I interviewed Mary earlier today as well. Mary, thanks for meeting with me today. Some people say that you're delusional. Other people are interested in what you have to say. The city is really divided.
I understand their doubts. I was brokenhearted this morning. I went to the tomb to anoint Jesus, and he wasn't there. I kept thinking that somebody had taken his body.
Empty, as the soldiers described the tomb, but I'd like to hear your side of the story.
I was outside the tomb, and then suddenly I saw this man come out of nowhere. I thought it must have been the gardener, but then he started speaking to me, and he said, "Mary." And then I looked at him, and then I realized that it was Jesus, and Jesus was talking to me.
Mary, forgive my bluntness, but you are a woman, and in our society, you know that a woman's testimony doesn't carry any weight in court. Do you think anyone's going to believe you?
I know the law's ways, Nigelis, but I don't care what people think. I saw him alive, speaking. Not just me, but others saw him too. Peter, John, all of the other disciples. Will you dismiss them as well? We were devastated when we saw Jesus die, but he is risen now. I arrived and the stone was already moved and there were neatly folded clothes just laying there. It has to have been Jesus.
That's an interesting point about the folded clothes. And yet the soldier's story that the disciples stole the body is also believable in some ways. But then what's with the sudden wealth? There's so many conflicting stories going on here. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Yeah, that was really interesting. Mary came across very intelligent, certainly not hysterical. Mary's conviction was unshakable, and I could see she's not the sort of person to lie. I knew she was a close friend of Jesus, and she must have been devastated on Friday. And, well, people in grief don't suddenly make up stories about resurrection. And I must admit, I was very impressed with Mary. Lastly, I interviewed a townsman hanging around the tomb who also seemed to know something about the events that had happened. We really were amazed by that man Jesus. His teaching was incredible. We loved the way he stood up to the greedy money changers in the temple and the way that he dealt with the Pharisees. Oh, those people are such hypocrites. But it was tragic how he was killed, and we figured he was just another person who said he'd come to save us. But now that people are saying that they've seen him come back to life again, it's incredible. We don't know what to believe. I didn't actually believe Mary, of course, since she's a woman. But now that Peter and the other disciples are saying that they've seen him too, it's really making me think. Very interesting. Those townsfolk are the very ones that had wanted Barabbas saved and Jesus killed 2 days earlier. And now they're realizing Jesus actually was on their side and he'd done nothing wrong. So I think taking all the evidence up, there's 3 options here. Number 1, either the disciples came and stole the body, maybe when the earthquake happened, but I still can't believe that a squad of Roman soldiers would let that happen without a fight. And those scrawny disciples would be no match for trained Roman guards. And then the guards being free to go around spreading the story is bizarre. The Romans would never admit that they'd failed in a task. And if the disciples stole the body, why would they risk prison or even death for a lie? Those disciples had scattered in fear on Friday. Why would they suddenly find courage and face Roman soldiers and then possible crucifixion themselves for some sort of hoax? Well, the other option, I was thinking, maybe Jesus wasn't killed on the cross. They put him in the tomb. Somehow he revived. The earthquake happened. Somehow the stone rolled away. Jesus snuck out and he's run away and he's appearing to his disciples. But that also seems incredible because he'd repeatedly said that he was God and he would come back to life. And I don't think the disciples would be impressed by this half-dead, whipped man staggering back saying, "Yes, it's me, I've come back for life from the dead." And also, I still can't believe those Romans would let some half-dead fellow crawl out of that tomb. So the third explanation is, the only one that's left, is that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And Mary was right. She saw him. I must say, If the disciples wanted to spread a lie, they wouldn't choose a woman to be their main witness. No one accepts a woman's testimony. So either she really did see Jesus, or it's true that maybe he has come back to life. Because to go from extreme grief to confidence like that, that's powerful stuff. So Jerusalem is a city full of questions tonight. A remarkable man and an empty tomb. A soldier who blames thieves but is suddenly rich. And it's not just the way that Jesus died, but it's the way he lived that's so compelling. I came seeking facts. I was a skeptic. This is either the greatest deception in history or the greatest miracle. Incredible as it seems, the facts are pointing to a resurrection. One thing's for sure, if this really is true, then it changes everything. If Jesus Christ has risen from the dead, perhaps everything he said was true. And then for us, incredibly, there might be hope after death. And it's just the way Jesus carried himself, seeming to be in control of the whole situation that final week, orchestrating his own death and the way he died, full of courage and calmness, and just that obscure cry to his Father. There was something of the great prophets in him, something like Moses. I have to say, in the light of the evidence, I'm starting to think the evidence does stack up for Jesus coming back to life. I was a skeptic, but there's no motives for the disciples to lie about this when it puts their lives in danger. And his whole message was that he was God. And incredibly, could it be that this Jesus really was from God? I have to admit, but I'm now believing what Mary and those disciples are saying. If this was a giant hoax, well, it's going to fizzle out very quickly and we'll never hear of Jesus of Nazareth again. But if this man really did rise from the dead, well, I think it's going to change the whole world. It's going to upend the Roman Empire. You know, I have to admit, looking at Jesus' life, the way he died, the empty tomb, I do believe. I want to believe. I guess that makes me a believer. I believe, yeah. Hey, wait. You can't arrest me. I'm a famous reporter.
I'm arresting you for being a believer in Jesus.
What? But I'm a reporter. This is the free.
Thank you.
I'm not forsaken, never alone. The God of heaven calls me his own. He's not just seated upon the throne. I know he's right here inside my home. I've got a treasure here in my heart, and in my weakness it won't depart. I have a Savior who will abide. He's not just with me, he lives inside. Just go as Daniel lives, our God will bring you out, and he will testify. He shuts the lion's mouth. Go ask those Hebrew boys if he'll stick by your side. They will identify the fourth man in the fire. They'll tell you